Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Stone Chapel Podcast. My name is David Capes. I am the academic director at the Lanier Theological Library. And why am I telling you that? Well, because today's podcast is going to be a little different. And that is because it's a call for papers. And I'm going to be both the guest and the host, how does that work, on the podcast. Now, a call for papers has gone out from the Evangelical Foundation for Biblical Research. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, but first let me tell you a little bit about who the EFBR is, the Evangelical Foundation for Biblical Research.
Well, that's a mouthful.
It's a group who creates opportunities and events and then finally publications to promote biblical studies from a primarily evangelical perspective, in ways that have the church in mind. We have created over the past 15 years a number of different events in Cambridge, in Oxford, in Houston, and more recently in Colorado Springs. So we want you to know about it. Our next event is going to take place in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina in May of 2026. But more about that in just a second. Now, in order to view this call for papers, the best way to do that is to go to efbr.net, efbr.net. And you can see those. Here are the dates, May 28th to May 30th, 2026 in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, or Surfside Beach, which is located right there. Now, there will be two symposia, one on New Testament, one on the Old Testament. Let's talk about the New Testament first. The theme of that is the role of the Spirit in spiritual formation. The role of the Spirit in spiritual formation. Very excited about this colloquy, this conversation that's going to go on. We're going to invite about 12 to 15 New Testament scholars. Some of those are going to be seniors. Some of those are going to be junior. Some of those are going to be mid-career. So wherever you are, if you're thinking about, writing about, contemplating these matters, we would love to hear from you. Now, here are just some of the topics that we're thinking about at this point. Obviously, Pentecost comes to mind, but was there kind of an understanding of the role of the Spirit in the life of Jesus prior to Pentecost? And also, we might even say discipleship. And was the gifting of the Spirit, the Spirit's coming, was it for the advancement of the church, or was it for individual believers' spiritual enhancement? Those are some of the questions. Here's some other ones. If worship is so critical to spiritual formation, as a lot of people think, then what does the New Testament teach about how the Spirit guides and animates worship? What can be said in the New Testament period about the inspiration of the Spirit in composing and collecting and canonizing the Hebrew Bible, and then also what we know today is the New Testament, all of the Christian scriptures? Also, when you think about it, when early Christians read and reread the books of the Old Testament, the prophets, the law, the writings, what role does the Spirit play in shaping how they read and how they interpreted those texts? Now, the Old Testament Symposium is going to meet at the same time, and they're going to be discussing the Holy Spirit's role in the Old Testament believers' spiritual formation. Sometimes we talk about spiritual formation as if it's just a post-New Testament phenomena, but in fact, we certainly can describe the idea of the role of the Spirit in and forming and shaping the people of Israel, the people who became the chosen people. So they'll be looking at questions into and related to that. Here are some of the questions that we're looking to consider. One is, in what ways can we talk about the third person of the Trinity in the Old Testament as a part of the spiritual life of a person who was a child of Israel? How does the idea of holiness and righteousness relate to the work of the Spirit? And one might even say one's ability to, quote, keep the law or do the law. How does that relate? Is there a difference between what we see in the Old Testament and the New Testament when it comes to the role of the Spirit? And then, of course, we have to ask the worship question. What role might the Spirit have had in worshiping in the Old Testament period, in the Old Testament times, in relationship to the temple, in relationship to the sanctuary, and other aspects? Now, in order to be considered, these are some things you've got to do. First of all, let me encourage you to go to the website, efbr.net. And we want you to submit an abstract, a title and an abstract, for a paper that you would like to do. Now, the names of the people and the places where you can send them are on the website. But we want you to submit those by December the 15th of 2025. And the directors of the FBR are going to select the papers by the end of January 2026. Now, if your paper is accepted, then your way and your transportation and your lodging and your meals will be paid by the EFBR. And if your paper is invited to be a part of the publication, then we'll pay a $500 stipend to anyone who can submit the paper, finish the paper, submit the paper by our deadline. We hope many of you will take us up on this opportunity. Now, the FBR has been in business, as it were, doing this for about 15 years now, and we've done symposia, and we have several books that are out and several books that are in the offing right now, and we look forward to greater and more publications. But this is a great opportunity for a young scholar, an old scholar, a mid-career scholar, to come and be a part of a great conversation. This is not like SBL or another professional organization where you have one speaker up front and you've got 10, 15 rows of people who are silent mainly and just waiting for their paper or just waiting to hear something of interest. This is an ongoing conversation with about 12 to 15 Old Testament scholars and 12 to 15 New Testament scholars. And that will give us an opportunity to have some very good connections together over meals and perhaps over plenary sessions that will be described. Since our topics are related, it makes sense that we come together from time to time and discuss what our findings are. Now, we've got some great people lined up already to come to both, and we want you to be a part of that. So go to efbr.net, look up upcoming events, and you'll be able to see the details about that. This is a different kind of podcast, I know, because we don't normally do this kind of thing, but I think the importance of it for many of our listeners is going to be significant. And we will let you know, let all the rest of you know who can't be there for whatever reason, let you know what the results of that have been after the fact. We're going to have the conference. We're going to create the book. We're going to make that available to people, we hope, in the next couple of years. It takes a while to do that, to edit all the papers and to get them down. But this is designed to be both a scholars and a church leaders kind of an event. We want the scholarship to be in service to the church. We want to create papers and thoughtful engagement so that the people who are present can go back and influence their students, their churches, their church leaders. And we invite, in addition to this, I should say, we invite not only people who are scholars in a field, we recognize and want to invite church leaders who might have an interest in these topics as well. So we want you to know about this. Please let us know. Go to the website. You can ask questions. You can send in your abstract, but please do so by December the 15th, 2025, so that you might be considered for the conference that we're holding in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, May 28th and 29th, 2026. Well, a little different kind of podcast here today for the Stone Chapel, but I think it's worth it. One of the reasons we're doing this on the Stone Chapel is because our first two conferences in the last 5 or 6 years have been at Lanier Properties. At Lanier, the first was 2022, the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, Texas, where we took up the topic of does it really matter who wrote the Bible? and we had about 25 scholars there. And then in 2024, we had a conference in Yarnton in Oxford, and we had a conference there for the New Testament side, the pastoral implications of the parousia, looking at the ethical, formulative kinds of things that we find in the New Testament and beyond for the idea of the second coming of Jesus. And the Old Testament crew, led by Dan Fredericks, well, they looked at a little different question. They looked at the aphorisms in the Old Testament. They looked at the book of Proverbs and places like that, where there are these statements about life, and seeing and questioning to what degree those kinds of statements, those kinds of texts figured into the spiritual lives of the people of Israel. And in what way did that happen? It's different than law, of course. It's different than a worship text like you might find in the book of Psalms. How did these particular texts work and function in that time? That was their question. Well, there's more to come. Just stay tuned to the EFBR by their website, efbr.net. Until next time, I'm David Capes. Thanks for listening.